Thank you guys for coming. We can settle into the present moment with just a few deep breaths. Maybe just take some time to let all the concerns of the day, at work or the commute or whatever's going on at home, just put them to the side maybe. Now is the time we can just focus on being present. Letting whatever arises in awareness, just letting it be. Sounds, thoughts, feelings. It's the sensation of the breath. Wherever it feels most prominent to you. Just notice that it arises without you needing to do anything. And likewise, it passes away without you needing to do that either. Simply let attention rest on the breath. And perceive whatever is there to be perceived. Physical sensation in the form of tingling or movement, pressure, temperature. Perhaps there is emotional tone associated with the breath. Just noticing. So if you like, our practice today might be around strengthening the intention to return to the present moment when we're caught up in thought. This is a completely natural process. Sometimes people might feel critical of themselves for being lost in thought. But it's something we're made to do. We're made to think about the world. So there doesn't need to be any judgment around it. And at the same time, there is benefit to being present and not lost in thought. One way you can do that is to take your natural capacity to return and make it a bit more pleasant. Make that coming home to the present something that feels nice, something that your mind wants to do and is happy to do. Not a thing of judgment or frustration. Something welcome. So you might do that very simply by just setting the intention that when you come back to the present moment, spend 5 or 10 or 15 seconds in something pleasant, some gratitude that you woke up for the moment, some gratitude about being able to practice, being able to move forward towards the end of suffering. There could be some pleasant physical sensation that's in the body. So perhaps for this meditation, you might set that intention to cultivate one of those things when you return from being lost in thought. Just watching the breath arise and pass away. Whenever you get lost in thought and return, just doing yourself the kindness of spending 5, 10, 15 seconds, something pleasant, something enjoyable. Meditation sometimes feels like a very serious business. It's really not. Just be kind to yourself. Where is your mind right now? You are returning from being lost in thought. You can be kind to yourself for a bit. And put the attention on something pleasant. Gratitude, or mudita, or metta. A pleasant physical sensation. And if the mind gets too agitated, to feel like meditation would be not pleasant, it's okay to set what we're doing aside and just be kind to yourself in whatever way feels good to you. Otherwise, you can continue on watching the breath arise and pass away, and letting the mind return to the present with some kindness, some focus on pleasant sensations. Just letting the mind return to the pleasant moment, into a nice, comfy chair and some warm tea. Just giving it some pleasant sensations, the way of welcoming it home. And then returning to the breath after some time. In these last few minutes, and continue on if you like. But if the mind feels stable, you can simply let go of all doing. Just let the flow of experience, the flow of experience. Thank you all for the sit. So last week I talked about why we might want to practice. I spoke about how we all might have our individual reasons to practice, or kind of individual wordings for that reason. Those reasons are all outgrowths of this kind of more deeper, more primitive desire to wake up, desire to find lasting happiness or freedom or peace. And the suttas speak about this in the Four Noble Truths. The third noble truth states that the end of dukkha, the end of suffering, comes about from the end of craving, and the end of craving in the fourth noble truth comes about from practicing the Eightfold Path or following the Dhamma. And so I want to continue on from that discussion and just see if I can give a kind of general overview of what the path looks like. Not so much in terms of how to practice, but what someone's path might look like. And so the thing to know about this talk is that it's maybe something to be held lightly. This is mostly my story, meaning not my particular journey, but my understanding of how this works. Some of this is drawn from the suttas, but a lot of this is just sort of my understanding. But I do think it can be helpful to have some kind of ability to contextualize where you've been and where you are now, and have some kind of view about what the future might look like, even if it's not perfectly accurate, or maybe all of it doesn't apply to you. But so I hope it will be useful in that sense. So let's start at the beginning, the very beginning. At some point in the development of a fetus, awareness attaches to the body and the mind, and there is experience. And if you can put yourself in that position for a minute, or try to, you might imagine that it's probably a pretty nice place, right? Everything is taken care of. You're warm and enveloped, and you get your nutrition without having to do anything. All your waste is kind of taken care of automatically. You're safe. So I imagine life in that state is probably quite pleasant. And then comes birth. Birth brings about pain. There is pain inherent in having a body. No matter how well off you are, how much money you have, there's always going to be some pain in having the body. There will be hunger or injury or sickness. It's just a fact of being alive and having a body. And so when this child is born, it goes from a place of more or less only pleasant sensations to having both pleasant and unpleasant sensations. There's a natural desire to move towards the pleasant and away from the unpleasant. But the important part here, and maybe the kind of big point that I wanted to make here, is that there's a time in a child's life before the development of the self. So before this, the self comes along that causes us suffering. And so there's a set of patterning in us that, the world has pleasant or unpleasant, and the thing that comes after is not a reaction of the self, which is really important to know, because how this progresses is we develop a sense of self, and then as we become enlightened, an arhat will move through the world without reacting with the sense of self. So the key point that I'm trying to make, which I don't think I set that up very well, but the key point that I'm trying to make is that the relevant feature of an arhat's mind, someone who's enlightened, is that they don't react to pleasant and unpleasant with a sense of self. And this capability is still in us. It's a function of us having gone through childhood in a way that we move through the world without that sense of self. And so when people talk about the path of practice, kind of liability of that metaphor of a path is that it has the implication that there's somewhere to go or something to get. There's a sense in which that's true, but there's also a sense in which that's false. We have the thing that's the characteristic of enlightenment inside of us. We know that patterning already. Our true nature is already present. It's our path is not getting something new. It's seeing through the stuff that blocks this understanding that's already present, which I think is a pretty important point to know. But so if we go back to this child has a preference for the pleasant, but it has no real way to get there. A young child can pretty much just, flail their arms and scream, right? It's not, you can't move in an effective way with those things. So it needs some kind of tool to move through the world. And luckily, evolution has provided us one. The Pali word for this is sanya, which is usually translated as perception, which is not my favorite translation. I like conceptualization better. So conceptualization meaning breaking the world into pieces. A way to explain that is there's the kind of raw sense state of experience, the touch and the sight and the sound and the taste, without any understanding present. Sanya is the thing that takes the raw experience and puts understanding into it. Sanya is the thing that goes from, this being just a bunch of green in my field of vision to a cushion. Sanya is the thing that takes this room that I see in and says that there are people in it instead of just kind of raw data. If that makes sense. And so the child uses Sanya to kind of get a picture of the world and break things into pieces and give them characteristics and put things into categories. And it's the process of learning about the world, which is a necessary feature to do anything. Like if you're a very young child who doesn't understand anything about the world, you can't act effectively. And so one of the pieces of Sanya is that this child starts to understand that this body and these feelings are it. It starts to understand the sense of self. And I think that's an important point to know too. The self is just, it's special because it so dominates our life, but it's just a normal process in the same way we divide up the world into lamps and cars and categories and that sort of thing. So by the time the child creates the sense of self, this is a kind of milestone in development. It's a stable way of orienting that being in the world. You might imagine what it would be like if this body and this mind worked without you having any kind of understanding or any kind of story around it. It would be extremely confusing, and you wouldn't be able to do anything and make predictions about how things will affect you. And so this is my other point. It's a necessary stage of development to cultivate a sense of self. I think when I first understood about the self and it being the source of our suffering, it became this negative thing, this thing that was bad, and I wanted to push away. And I have a couple little nephews who are going through this process of building their sense of self, and I would, I thought some about how to shape their lives so they didn't develop a sense of self, but it doesn't work that way. The self is a necessary part of our existence, and hopefully it's a stage we grow out of. It's not something we're stuck in our whole lives, but. That was my other big point here. So as the sense of self develops, it becomes stronger as this being interacts with the world and accretes more views about how they are and how life is and how things should be. And at some point, there is some knowledge of suffering, so knowledge of this wheel of samsara that we're on. Maybe most people wouldn't put it in those words and would instead see it as kind of a dissatisfaction with how life is going, or perhaps some kind of significant negative event. But there's some idea that there's suffering, and there's a wish to do something different. And that wish can take people to different places. One of those places is to finding the path, finding the Dhamma. So I think that's where most people would start the story of the path to enlightenment, but I wanted to do some of the background as well. So I mentioned the Four Noble Truth, or the fourth noble truth, which is the end of craving comes about by practice, by following the Dhamma. In particular, the Eightfold Path is what's mentioned in the fourth noble truth. And you guys all may know the Eightfold Path, but I will go over it just in case. It's good to repeat that sort of thing. This is at the core of practice. So the Eightfold Path is 8 steps. They're not sequential steps. They're steps that are meant to be run concurrently. There is right view, which is basically understanding the world as a product of karma and causes and conditions, and not being kind of stuck in the story. There is right motivation, which is kind of a commitment to nonviolence and renunciation and such. There's right speech and right action and right livelihood, which are all basically kind of acting in ways that don't cause harm to people. There is right effort, which there's a kind of pithy little sutta that I like that explains right effort pretty well. SN 1.1, the Crossing the Flood Sutta, somebody asked the Buddha, how did you cross the flood? Meaning, how did you get enlightened? And the Buddha replies, I crossed the flood by not stopping and not struggling. So not doing nothing, but not doing too much. And that's one way of looking at right effort, the middle way. And there's right mindfulness, which is basically trying to be present and making sure you're trying to put your attention on useful things. And lastly, there's right concentration, which is essentially sitting meditation, although there's maybe a bit more to it. So when one practices Dhamma, one practices these 8 things. And there's you can divide these 8 up into 3 categories: Sila, Samadhi, Panya. So Sila, ethics; Samadhi, concentration or collectedness of mind; and Panya, wisdom. And the point that I want to make about the Eightfold Path in regards to kind of progress along the path is that there's I guess the way to describe it would be maybe like a synergistic effect between these 3 things: Sila, Samadhi, Panya. When you practice Sila, it makes Samadhi and Panya easier. When you practice Samadhi, it makes Sila and Panya easier in the last iteration of that. So this is kind of how you get momentum when you start. You practice, and these things all kind of reinforce each other. You sit and you do your practice, and you practice ethics off the cushion, and you practice right view and right motivation, and they all kind of reinforce each other and help, and get you kind of moving forward along the path. So that's where many folks who come to the Dhamma are. And that's a good place to be. You are doing things that make your life better and make the lives of those around you better. And in my mind, the next kind of milestone for practice, or milestone along the path, is to develop a daily sitting practice. And I think that's quite important. So the way I understand it is, you're walking along this path to enlightenment, and you're moving forward, but at the same time, there's a wind blowing you backward. The wind of the world. It's all of the kind of voices in the world pointing you at, finding happiness through the traditional means. Staying on the wheel of samsara. And so if you want to make headway against this wind, you need a You need a kind of sustained effort, which you really need a daily practice for this. And I want to say that if you don't have a daily practice, it's not something to be judgmental about. It's whether or not you have a daily practice whether or not you have a daily practice, it's because of what causes and conditions are present. And if the causes and conditions are not present, then you won't have a daily practice, and that's that. It's not any kind of reflection on you as a person. I'd also want to say that even if you don't have a daily practice, any amount of meditation you do is good. Any amount of meditation is beneficial. Any amount of non-meditative practice is beneficial. It's still a positive thing in your life, and it helps set up the conditions for you to start a daily practice. But the reason it's important is, in my mind, when you get a daily practice that's strong enough to allow you to make headway against this wind, that's when a lot of the meaningful, lasting change in your life starts to happen. And it's if you do that for an extended period of time, if you make headway against this wind for some good amount of time, you're more or less guaranteed to have meaningful, lasting change in your life. And so I would say to anyone who practices, like, the most important thing you can do if you don't have one is to establish a daily practice. And I thought I would just maybe like digress for a moment and talk about how to establish a daily practice just for a minute or two. So I talked last week about kind of dialing in your motivation and why you figuring out why you want to practice and figuring it out in a way that's salient and meaningful to you. And if you have that, and you have that kind of ready at hand, it can prevent a lot of the kind of chatter in the mind that pulls you away from practice. You know, there's always a reason to not sit. There's always something you could be doing, or always some kind of voice telling you, not to sit. But having a motivation kind of can pull you through that. The daily sitting practice is also amenable to, there's a whole bunch of literature about, developing positive habits, the kind of productivity, self-help stuff. Establishing a daily time to sit is amenable to that sort of thing. There's all sorts of literature on that that's very helpful. And the last thing I'll mention is what I was trying to get at in the meditation today. It's when meditation is pleasant and when it's something you want to do, it's a lot easier to practice. If you're kind of dragging yourself to the cushion every day, it's a really hard sell to keep doing it. If it's something you like and something you enjoy, it's much easier. So it pays off to like find a way to make meditation pleasant. It can be the sort of thing that we did in the meditation, like kind of adding pleasantness to the meditation. You can do it at the beginning of the meditation, or just kind of however works for you. So that's a milestone in my mind, establishing a daily practice. Once you've done that, the next kind of phase of practice it involves, this is maybe counterintuitive, but it involves kind of getting a stable sense of self, a stable and positive sense of self. And it's counterintuitive because the point of this whole endeavor is to be able to see through the sense of self. But it turns out that it's really hard to see through the sense of self if you don't like what you see, if it's unpleasant and hard for you to look at. Basically, when you have kind of large insight into the lack of a sense of self, if there's any kind of trauma or hurt that's still left over, it's probably going to come up then, and that is really unpleasant, and the mind really does not want to do that. So it's not that it's impossible to wake up from a sense of self that's got hurt and trauma attached to it, but it's pretty hard. So at this point in practice, I see it as kind of getting rid of the backlog of bad karma and hurt and trauma and all the sort of negative stuff that we kind of come to practice with. And there's a period of practice that is really just about sitting on the cushion, in my mind. It lends itself to the metaphor of the path in that there is work that needs to be done. There is this kind of difficult stuff that hinders your path that needs to be taken care of before you can go further. And we all come to practice with more or less of that, so this might take more or less time, but I think most people need to go through that at some point. And so that's one phase of practice, and like immediately after that, once you have a stable, positive sense of self that you can look at and be okay with, the next thing to do is to start to undermine that, to understand that this story that you're telling, it may now be a pleasant story, but it's still a story. So seeing through that sense of self and kind of moving closer to enlightenment in a sort of direct way. This is often where a lot of insights start to occur. You may have had some insights earlier in practice, but once a lot of the kind of afflictive stuff gets cleared out, there's room to see things clearly, and that's what insights are. Insights are clear seeings into the true nature of reality. So reality has three characteristics to it: anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, suffering or unsatisfactoriness, and not self. And we habitually misunderstand these characteristics. We habitually understand the world as having things that are permanent, having things that are capable of giving us lasting happiness, and having a solid, stable sense of self. And insights are clear seeing into the truth of reality. What metaphor did I use last time? I think I used the metaphor of insights as being, in the case where you're in an unfamiliar room at night. So maybe you're in a hotel or something, and it's pitch dark, and you move around, and you're trying to go to the bathroom, and you bump into stuff because it's pitch black. That's an analogy to us, how we live in the world. We move around in darkness because we habitually misunderstand how the world really is. And we bump into things. We do things that cause us suffering. In that metaphor, insights would be like, a small spotlight has been turned on, so you can see that area clearly, and you don't bump into things in that area. And you can have complete insights into those characteristics, but those kind of tend to happen later. The insights I'm talking about here are sort of smaller insights, and they're confined to particular aspects of your life or particular patterns you have. But they're still quite valuable in that you don't make the same mistakes you did anymore. Okay, so I see that I've made it halfway through, and I've about used up our time, so that works out well. Let me see how to end this. So at this point in practice, this person is probably in a pretty good state. Whatever external circumstances are, they're probably doing pretty well. They've probably cultivated quite a bit of the positive characteristics that come along with practice. If you put this person next to that same person when they started the practice, you would see quite a bit of difference. And this difference would probably be pretty noticeable to people who knew that person. So there's been quite a bit of change already. But what's to come is quite a bit bigger. I'll actually leave that as my cliffhanger for next week. Thank you all.